city, all over the world, wherever you may be listening. In the trenches with you, I'm Jeffrey Dubroff alongside my good friend Garrett Schwartz. And Garrett, you know, you and I took a vacation this weekend, but I mean...
I don't know if I would call it quite a vacation.
I mean, that's what I was going to say. I got this as a birthday present. I texted my dad during the game, I want my money back, and he said, that's not my fault. But the vacation I'm referring to with Garrett was that horrendous trip to Chicago that all culminated in a 49-14 beatdown of the USC Trojans on the road against Notre Dame. And look, Garrett, you and I predicted that USC was going to lose, but not like this. Garrett, what happened?
Well, there are definitely a few takeaways from the game. Number one is this USC team isn't quite nearly as good as we thought we were. Number two is you probably shouldn't travel over 1,000 miles for a football game, especially in the middle of Indiana, when there isn't really much to do other than watch football.
You know what's crazy is I've traveled for 3 games now, outside of the Rose Bowl. No, 4 games. I'm 1-3.
Yeah, I'm not too hot myself.
I mean, 1-3.
In the big games,
Two of which
it's Notre Dame. We had that big loss against Stanford in the Pac-12 championship. I was there. But yeah, I think my biggest takeaway, Jeff, is...
yeah, I'm not counting weekender games either. I'm just counting big road trips.
So my biggest takeaway from the game is that I really need to reconsider my faith. And I'll tell you why. In the first half, I was sitting in the Notre Dame student section, me and a few of my buddies. The only 4 proud Trojans wearing USC gear in the Notre Dame student section. Now, you talk about enemy territory. I was a USC student who also happened to be a Jew. So, yeah, enemy territory. Anyway, at about halftime, I decided I'd had enough of the heckling and the stuff being thrown at me. So I meandered my way to the USC fan student section all the way at the top level of the stadium, and I locked eyes across the way from Touchdown Jesus. And I just thought to myself, man, God is sending me a sign, because clearly I was being punished for entering this stadium, traveling over 1,000 miles to watch, you know, think about it, you had thousands of USC fans show up to South Bend, but heck, that football team most certainly did not show up. So, Jeff, I'm being a little facetious here, but let's talk football X's and O's. What do we make of that game?
Garrett, this was the most embarrassing game I've ever witnessed in person as a USC football fan. I was at the Alabama game when we lost 52-6. This was different. This was a rivalry game, and this is a loss, by the way. And I was thinking about it. There are 2 games that the USC board and the people and the athletic director, Lynn Swann, really care about, and it's this and it's UCLA. And you don't lose to Notre Dame or UCLA by 35 points.
Yeah, this went from an elimination game to a humiliation game. I mean, other than the fact that the game plan clearly was not right, I mean, this team looked lifeless, unmotivated, completely lackluster on the sidelines. And there's a lot of things we could point to, but let's start with the coaching. For the second week in a row, it looked like, and Sam Darnold has pointed this out before, he said it in a press conference following the win against Utah, and he later apologized for it, but it looked like the USC receivers, their routes were being jumped, and it probably stems from a lack of creativity in the offensive play calling. Is T. Martin's play calling and the coaching in general to blame at this point in the season?
I mean, I wouldn't go that far, but he has a point. I was sitting in the stands, and we knew what was about to happen. He was going to throw an out route to Tyler Vaughns, and the cornerback knew that. They do have a good idea. I mean, it's very predictable, the USC offense, and it's getting even more and more predictable. And you saw Sam Darnold come out and say something and then apologize, and I don't think anyone deserves a rescinded. I don't think anyone deserves an apology, because I think he's right. At a certain point, rolling out to the right on 3rd down and throwing it to Deontay Burnett on about a 7-10 yard out route, it's just becoming too predictable, and teams know that. They say, okay, look, it's 3rd down, they're running out in a Trey right set, Sam's going to roll out, there's going to be a guy going deep, and they're going to try to hit Deontay Burnett in the flats. Take away the flats, interception, or he's going to throw an incomplete pass. And it's just getting monotonous, it's getting frustrating, it's getting to the point where T. Martin's job might be called for by many of the fans. And you have to remember this is one of the bigger things. This is an athletic director sitting in his office that did not hire Clay Helton. Clay Helton will constantly have to prove himself. And here's the thing he said in his press conference, which I agree with, Garrett. He said, you're at a school where winning a Rose Bowl in year 1 is not acceptable for year 2. I mean, he's arguably sitting in the the most intense college football coaching job in the country, but he needs to step up. And it doesn't hurt, or it doesn't help that the majority of his team is injured and they don't get a bye week. And that's something that you and I have gone back to over and over again, is that they don't have a bye week.
So I am actually not going to put the blame on Clay Helton. In fact, I do think there is someone who should be fired. I do not think it's T. Martin necessarily, though I certainly would not shed a tear if he were gone. I do not think it's Clay Helton, because seemingly this deck is stacked against him, and I think the guy who should be fired is Pac-12 Commissioner Larry Scott.
Yeah, you're right.
Because if you look at this USC team, in my opinion, it's a personnel issue. We're clearly not as talented. We were not as talented as that Notre Dame team. I mean, look, there were mistakes, which we've had throughout the season, right? USC now has the second most turnovers in the entire FBS. It's second out of 128 teams. Second out of 128 teams. But, Jeff, seemingly this USC team cannot overcome the injuries across the board. And where does that stem from? It stems from the no bye week.
Oh, 100%.
As the commissioner of the Pac-12, how do you allow your most hyped team, your most talented team, the team with the most potential to make the college football playoff, not have a bye week team? Now the Pac-12 is looking at the playoff picture, and for the second time in 4 years, they're going to be the Power 5 conference without a playoff team. In 2014, it was Oregon. Last year, it was Washington. But once again, I think there is virtually zero chance that the Pac-12 is represented in the college football playoff this year. Zero.
I agree, given the fact that the only team now that has a viable shot is Washington. And Washington still has to play Washington State, and they still have that bad Arizona State loss hanging over them, which may not end up turning into be a bad loss, and we're going to get to that later. But absolutely, Larry Scott has no one to blame but himself. How do you give your team that just won the Rose Bowl, your premier team, and USC, whether or not they're good, whether or not they are talented year after year, they're still the premier team in the Pac-12, and there's no arguing that. But the fact that they're coming off now as the media darling, you have one of the Heisman favorites, and you give them no bye week, which is unheard of. I've never heard of that before. It's unfathomable. It just doesn't make sense to me, Garrett. And now Larry Scott is going to be sitting there wondering why he doesn't have a team in the Pac-12 or in the college football playoff, and he has no one to blame but himself.
You know, Jeff, you and I talked a few months ago, during the summer actually, we talked about the strength of the different conferences within the Power 5 conferences, right? And we had mentioned that we had genuinely thought there was a strong argument for the Pac-12 being the strongest Power 5 conference. Mm-hmm. And then we kind of reneged on that and we said, okay, probably not, because the SEC still has Alabama and the Big Ten has Ohio State and Penn State and Wisconsin and Michigan. But we said, okay, there's a good argument for the Pac-12 being the deepest conference in the Power 5, just because, other than probably Oregon State, everyone else could hang, right? But I'm looking around now, and I think there's a really strong case to be made for the Pac-12 being the weakest Power 5 conference. I mean, look, you got the SEC, who not only has Alabama, but a Georgia team that I think even if they lose to Alabama in the SEC championship, they could still get in, barring they lose by more than one touchdown, right? You look at the Big Ten. We already talked about the Big Ten, and Penn State, Wisconsin, Ohio State. I mean, Michigan.
Michigan State's in the top. Michigan State's 18.
Yeah, totally. And the ACC, Miami is a top 10 program this year.
NC State, Clemson, you would have Florida State.
And finally, the Big 12, who we were really hard on because we thought Texas was going to be near the top of that conference, but they still got Oklahoma, TCU, Oklahoma State, and the Pac-12.
And by the way, I want to say something on this Texas team. They lost to Oklahoma State by 3 in overtime. They should have won that game. They lost to Oklahoma by 5 on a blown coverage, and they lost to us by 3. That's a team that has lost by the 11 points combined. I mean, that is unbelievable. That is a good football team. The Big 12 is strong, and the Pac-12 is weak.
And I'll tell you, the only chance that Washington and Washington State would have had to make a playoff, in my appearance, is a strong out-of-conference schedule. Because wins inside the conference simply will not do it. And if you look at the only team who really had a strong out-of-conference schedule, it was USC, right? With wins against Texas and they got beaten by Notre Dame, but that was an opportunity right there. So once again, I think the guy to blame is Larry Scott. But let's definitely take a step back and look at the USC performance.
Oh, 100%. Because at the end of the day, Garrett, it was abysmal on both sides of the ball. And you look at this team, and I understand they're beat up and they're hurt, but Notre Dame absolutely manhandled the line of scrimmage, both offensively and defensively. And you can't make the mistake, or you can't make the excuse that the right side of Notre Dame's offensive line, all Americans, that's college football. If you want to be the best, you need to beat the best. And they clearly did not show that.
So the story of the game is you mentioned both sides of the line, and it's clearly dictated in the performance of the run game. Notre Dame, 377 rushing yards, averaging 8 yards a carry. Josh Adams alone with almost 200 yards total, averaging more than 10 yards a carry. That's more than a first down every time he touched the ball. On the other side of USC, rushing 31 times for 76 yards. Our premier back, Ronald Jones, 32 yards on 12 carries, averaging under 3 yards a carry. And I think the story, you could blame it on the coaching, you could blame it on the game plan. Jeff, it's the injuries. No Stephen Carr for USC, a depleted offensive line. And if you look at the defensive side of the ball for USC, no Josh Fatu.
We were starting a true freshman at nose tackle,
we knew what they were doing virtually every play, right? They were going to run the ball, or their quarterback was going to hold the ball long enough where he was going to be able to scramble to the outside.
But at a certain point, Garrett, I want to rewind just a little bit. There are certain things that are absolutely in your control, and injuries are not one of them. But holding on to the football is. You start off with a great defensive stop. They didn't get any positive yards in that first drive. USC looked fired up. They looked good. You get the ball in your own in Notre Dame territory, and you muff the snap.
So let me ask you, if we, in your opinion, had Darnold not botched that snap, and maybe we even score that possession, but had he not botched the snap, is that a different game, in your opinion?
No, because there's so many factors that come along with it. I'm not going to say one play dictated the game, but that one play very much seemed like I was sitting with my friends and we just looked at each other and go, of course that happened. Of course that happened. We just made a great stop, and of course that happened. Same thing with the muff punt. We're only down 14-0. The drive before that, we were driving pretty well, and we threw the interception when we were in Notre Dame territory, and Jack Jones muffs the punt, and we just say, of course that happened. Right. And they take it 21-0.
The muff punt, the Darnold fumble, the Darnold interception, but in my opinion, even if USC had committed 0 mistakes that game, I still think we lose by 2 or 3 possessions. We were vastly outmatched. The moment that really made me realize how overmatched we were was coming in the second half. USC finally scores, right, their first touchdown of the game, and you think, like, okay, maybe this team's got a little bit of momentum going, but their first defensive stand in the second half, the same old story, right? We knew Notre Dame was going to run the ball, and they just seemingly ran right through us and put together a complete drive, and I was like, wow, we know what they're doing, right? We still had a little bit of momentum. We were able to regroup at halftime, and you still can't stop Notre Dame. They didn't make any adjustments. And to me, that showed that we were really, really, really overmatched.
And you have to remember, it's a Notre Dame team, Garrett, that also had a week to prepare for us, and it's very
coming
easy.
Off a bye week.
If we're gonna sit here and say that our team's very predictable, I mean, having 2 weeks to prepare for this team, you should know the exact play that they're gonna run, and that's what it looked like. And we were the Trojans were outmatched completely. And the rush defense was abysmal. I mean, Josh, it was unbelievable. So when it's 35-14, you come out and Josh Adams has a 75-yard touchdown run right out of the gate. 42-14. They looked lifeless. They looked like they didn't care. And I'm not going to say they didn't, because I know that's not true.
So lifeless, they don't care. Those are things you pin on the coach. So you talked about this earlier. Is Clay Helton on the hot seat, in your opinion?
The only thing I can think about when I see Clay Helton's face is faith, family football, and you play to respect the stadium, and you play to respect the uniform, and those are all very nice things Those are very nice things for a coach to bring into a program when he's replacing a coach who had his inner demons in Steve Sarkisian, and that's what the culture needed, some rejuvenation of purity, and this is a family. But now it's time to win games, and he did that with the Rose Bowl. But now it's time to deliver, and you're not going to be able to rest on a Rose Bowl victory. You know who won a BCS bowl game when he was a coach very early on in his tenure at Michigan? Brady Hoke. He was fired 2 years later. 2 years later. A Rose Bowl at USC, and it was the Orange Bowl from Michigan when they absolutely dominated. I believe it was Virginia Tech. It was the Sugar Bowl, actually. Programs like that expect that every single year. Alabama is going to be on the verge of being in the conversation as one of the best teams in the country now for the 9th straight season. You're almost looking at a program that is about to have a UCLA John Wooden-like dynasty in college football. And that's what a program like USC expects to have. If USC finds a way to fall on the road against Arizona State, and we're going to bring on a good friend of mine, Josh Schaefer, he does play-by-play for the Arizona State Sun Devils. If they find a way to lose that game, Helton's seat is hot.
So I'm going to disagree, and here's why. Number one, that loss against Notre Dame, unquestionably embarrassing, but I'm just going to come out and say that was the most talented football team that I've seen in 4 years outside of that Alabama team we played in Dallas.
I agree with you.
But here's my bigger point. Lynn Swann himself said before the start of the season or after the first few games that he did not believe, even when all the media people still predicted USC to be a playoff team at the least, Lynn Swann did not believe USC to be a playoff or championship team because of the lack of depth for this team.
You were telling me that.
And because of the injuries due to this team, I think you can't really blame Helton. I mean, it's just at the end of the day, when you have 3 or 4 injuries to your offensive line and you lose your biggest playmaker in Stephen Carr and your biggest defensive playmaker in Porter Gustin, you can't expect to win big football games. I mean, I know it sounds a little silly to put it all on injuries and all on Larry Scott, but at the end of the day,
no, that is a huge
this
issue
Notre Dame
with it.
team was really good.
There was a sense of just a sheer lack of preparation that I saw. It just looked like they didn't know what they were doing.
But how much can you do when you can't run the
prepare.
football? I mean, you can't run the football, and you can't stop the run. What's your game plan? We knew what they were doing.
There's no different game plan. That's the thing.
But that's not a coaching problem. It's a personnel problem.
The fact, though, that they can still jump routes and read our routes and know what we're going to run shows that we're not changing anything. There's been no game plan changing at all. And it's been very, very apparent in multiple games this season.
I think they're very limited is the problem.
I think when you have a quarterback like Sam Darnold, you're not limited. He's still not pulling the ball and read options. This is a guy who runs a 4.4, 4.5 40. Let him run the ball.
Okay, Sam Darnold. Let's transition to Sam Darnold. By the way, from a pure stat line perspective, 20 for 28, 70%, 2 touchdowns. Okay.
Not bad.
But no, clearly not good enough. The fumble, the interception, Darnold's been turnover plagued the entire season. But the biggest surprise to me was learning that Darnold's been fighting an ankle injury. Not just this game, but for the last few weeks. Now, I don't really know what to make of that. I mean, for one, it does explain Darnold not being at his best the last few weeks. But in my opinion, I think this is kind of a bailout by Clay Helton. If Darnold was really fighting an ankle injury, why are you not reporting that? Doesn't that seem a little fishy to you?
It does. It seems like he is saying, "Oh yeah, Sam's been hurt. Sam's been hurt."
But do you think this is Clay Helton protecting Sam Darnold in the event that he decides to go pro, and Clay Helton's realizing my guy's draft stock is starting to plummet?
Maybe, but at the same time, if I'm Clay Helton, I selfishly want him to stay. Because, I mean, Matt Fink is not Sam Darnold. Although Matt Fink has actually been somewhat impressive in some of his performances, he's no Sam Darnold. No one is. And if I'm Clay Helton, I'm texting him day and night asking, have you made a decision yet? Anyway, though, that's all we have for that for right now. Coming up in just a few moments, a friend of mine, like I mentioned, Josh Schaefer, student play-by-play radio for the Arizona State Sun Devils, is going to be coming on the show. Lots of knowledge. This is a team that beat Washington at home and beat Utah by 10 on the road. They beat Utah more than we did on the road. We have that and more when we return. are back. We have with us on the air right now Josh Schaefer calling in from Tempe, Arizona, from Arizona State. Josh, you there? Well, the instructions there are just wrong. Click that left. No, let's click that top left button. Josh, you there with us?
Hey, I'm here. How are you?
Oh, there it is. We figured it out this time. In front of us. Josh, how you doing, my man? Long time.
Yeah, it's been a while. I'm doing great. How are you?
Doing good.
Actually, we probably could be doing better.
Yeah, we could be doing better. At USC, I mean...
Hey, to be honest, I'm in the same boat you guys are to some extent.
I mean, but you guys pulled out a big win, and that's what we're going to talk about. This is an Arizona State team that Garrett and I were looking at. Quality wins along with some quality losses. You're coming off a 10-point road win against Utah, a Utah team that USC had to get a 2-point conversion stop to beat. And then you're also coming off one of those wins against Washington. That at that time, to me personally, I didn't think much of it. I just thought, wow, that's just a choke job by Washington. But Arizona State's proving some people wrong. What are you seeing from this team that you've liked so far this season?
Well, I mean, after the Devils' first few games, it was really turning into a season where you should have won your first 4, you were probably going to lose your next 4. And then now it's turning into a little bit flip-flopped. After the win against Oregon, things looked promising. They looked all right against Stanford. I think out of all of the losses ASU has had, I thought they actually played well in their loss up in Palo Alto. But then they come back and they get the big win over UW, and that's the thing that, you know, I'd like to think that people around the country are taking notice of, and it's the fact that although ASU has been upsetting a couple of really good football teams, it's the fact that, believe it or not, in their quote-unquote upset wins over Oregon, UW, and Utah, they were the better team from the opening kickoff, which is something that I think is so interesting, especially going back to that UW game. But when you look at Arizona State's defense for the past 2 years, it's been a secondary that's been in shambles. Even when they had Kareem Orr, who was that one bright spot, who turned out to kind of fall apart last year along with the entire defense. And the first few games, the defense was pathetic, to say the least. But these last couple games, it's like there's a completely different team despite a couple injuries on the defensive side of the ball. And throughout, you know, the poor season last year and the poor start this season, ASU's offense has actually been a bright spot. So believe it or not, these last 3 big wins for Arizona State have simply been credit to the defense 100%, in my opinion.
So you talked about the offense, you talked about the defense. I know you guys brought in a new defensive coordinator actually coming over from the scandal-plagued Baylor. But if you had to pinpoint 1 or 2 key areas that really have made the team improve from last season to this season, what would it be? Or where would you find it?
Well, it's definitely the pass rush. Excuse me. I thought ASU's pass rush was okay last year, especially against UCLA. I remember saying before the football game on our pregame show, saying if the Devils are able to blitz Josh Rosen every single play of the first quarter, then they will get to him and they'll rattle him and they'll win the game. And that's exactly what they did. And then they weren't able to do that against anybody else the rest of the season, it seemed like. Where you come into this season, and they're pretty much just reloading. You know, they came in with Karan Crump, who was going to be, I think, one of the best linebackers in the conference. But ASU has a weird hybrid-style defense with a couple hybrid defensive backs with linebackers and linebackers defensive ends. It's a couple interesting hybrids that they have on their defense. But then when you have Karan Crump go out earlier in the year, they ended up putting in a Southern California kid, J.J. Wilson, a tight end, moved him over to the defensive side of the ball, and everyone thought that this was going to be a huge hole right when it looked like the front 7 for the defense was going to be improving, and it looked like it was going to start falling apart. But J.J. Wilson has pretty much cemented himself into this ASU defense. So I definitely think the front 7 could turn out to be a force to be reckoned with throughout the rest of Pac-12 play here in 2017.
And that is, the front 7 is going to be a big factor in this week's matchup against USC because the offensive line for the Trojans has been a huge struggle as of late. Not sure if you know, but we've had 3 losses to the offensive line in terms of starters, and really we have not been able to cement the run game since, and having to rely on a pass game that really has not been good the entire season. But you mentioned a few minutes ago that you thought you came out of the gate as the better football team against Washington and against Utah. Now look, this Arizona State team, clearly a better team than last season, but I'm sure you and I would both agree that, Arizona State's still far from being a playoff team. So the question and the conversation that Jeff and I were having before you came on is, the Pac-12 might very well be the worst Power 5 conference in football. If you're supposedly elite teams in the conference, your Washingtons, your Washington States, your USCs are losing to what are considered to be, no offense, the middle tier to bottom tier teams in the conference. What does that say about the strength of the conference? Do you think the Pac-12 is in crisis?
Yeah, I think they are, and I think they've hit this crisis within the last few weeks. I'm from Southern California. I'm from LA. Grew up a season ticket holder for the Trojans. Follow them every week. So, of course, I'm hoping SC's able to figure out a way to get themselves into the playoff, as well as at some point even Washington State or UW. And I think that with the past few years, I think arguably the Pac-12 could have been considered one of the better conferences, because when you look at conferences like the SEC, you have your top-tier teams like Alabama and Georgia this year, but then you have the teams at the bottom of the conference that are, to put it plainly, not good football teams. Where I think you look at the Pac-12 in these past few years, you've had teams at the bottom that can still compete to some extent with the teams at the top, which is why I've always been such a huge fan of the Pac-12 conference, and why I think they don't get enough recognition. But if we're looking at this season alone, the Pac-12 is in trouble. I actually just finished recording a college football show myself a few minutes ago, and what we agreed on, I agreed with my other co-hosts, we think the Pac-12 is going to get left out of the college football playoff.
100%. In fact, I would be shocked at this point to see a Pac-12 team in the playoff.
Yeah, we were even settling on a potential Notre Dame Fighting Irish team getting in before anybody in the Pac-12, and I don't even think that's a stretch at this point.
No, absolutely not.
With Washington State and UW losing, convincingly to some bottom-tier teams in the conference, that's huge. And with USC losing, of course, to Washington State and Notre Dame, both very good football teams, I think USC is all but still considered for a playoff position. I think these three teams that I think most people are going to consider as the top three teams in the conference, that being SC, UW, and Wazoo, they're the best teams in the conference, and they have the best chance at still trying to compete for a top 10 position or a playoff spot. But as it looks right now, there has to be some major shakeups for the Pac-12 to find their way in, maybe even to the top 5 or 6 at the end of the season. I just don't see it happening right now. I don't think the Pac-12 is a bad conference. Just right now, especially right now, it seems like the bottom-tier teams are the teams that are starting to heat up, and the top-tier teams are cooling off. And for Pac-12 fans who want to see their conference in the playoff, that's not a great thing.
Yeah, I would go far to say that the Pac-12 may not be a terrible conference. It might be a terribly run conference. And Garrett and I were talking about it. Larry Scott gives his premier team in USC no bye week. All of a sudden, USC is playing 12 consecutive games. And, of course, what's going to happen? People are going to get banged up. They're going to get injured. They're going to lose their players. And ultimately, when Notre Dame has a chance to prepare 2 weeks for you, you only have a week to prepare for them off of a tough home game against Utah. But I'll transition now into this game this Saturday. It's a 7:45 kickoff Pacific time, so this is true Pac-12 after dark. You have Manny Wilkins, who's starting to heat up. Arizona State, back-to-back wins. What does Arizona State need to do, Josh, in order to pull off? I mean, although they're technically in the spread, the underdog, some might say this is an even game. What do they have to do to pull off, we'll say, the upset?
Well, there's been a lot more buzz around the Valley of the Sun within 3 days of this USC loss about this upcoming game. And I think a lot of people are starting to believe in the Sun Devils, as am I. I haven't been super high on ASU throughout the course of the season, but I think this is the best. I'm high on them coming into this game. With ASU, what they need to do right out of the gate is, regardless of if they get the ball first or not, they need to stop USC on the Trojans' first offensive drive. And then when ASU finally touches the ball, whenever that may be in the first quarter, they've got to eat up clock and they've got to get on the board first, whether it be a field goal or whether it be a touchdown. When they played against UW, their first possession ate up 8 minutes off the clock. Now, not only is that relatively unheard of in college football, it is a rarity at Arizona State that you piece together a touchdown drive in over 5 minutes even. That just simply doesn't happen at Sun Devil Stadium. You never get to see that for the maroon and gold, which was so incredible, which really took the wind right from underneath the wings of the Huskies, which is something that has happened with USC before. I look back at, I think, 2005 USC and Hawaii, and in that first quarter, it was all Hawaii because USC just couldn't get the ball in the hands of their offense. If ASU can do that, ASU has a chance to win this game. They need to score first, bottom line, because the Trojans aren't kidding anybody. They're the better team coming into this game. They just need to figure out if that next man up mentality is going to work for them and if they're able to put points on the board early, because the Devils have proven it's not about stats and it's not about the team you're playing up against. They've proven that they have more heart than the last few teams they can play against, and it's that thought in your head that if you can make people believe, you can go out and win. And I know that sounds cliche, but if USC can go and get themselves on the scoreboard first with 6 points immediately, ASU is going to have a tough time bouncing back from that.
So I've got some really good news for you, because if your two keys of the game are heart and getting on the board first, those are two categories that USC has really struggled in this season. Only twice has USC led it to half. Interesting fact. And also, if you talk about heart, if you watch the sidelines in South Bend this past Saturday, clearly something absent for this USC team. But all right, we're going to put you on the spot now. If you have to give your prediction for this Saturday, what is it and what is the score?
I've been battling back and forth with this since about halftime of the USC-Notre Dame game, to be totally honest with you guys. I think this is a game-time decision for me right now as well. I'm going to take USC. I think USC is the better team. I think they come out fired up, or at least I would like to think so if they want to get their season back on track. I think it's a close game. I think there are going to be a lot of USC fans out here. Sun Devil Stadium, I think, is going to be rocking. It's homecoming. They're going to fill that place up. It's going to be a very close game. The Devils are going to be in it until the very end. But I think USC figures out a way to pull out a win in this game. Like I said, the Devils are going to be in it from start to finish. But just this is when I think talent is going to figure out a way to emerge on top.
One final question for you, Josh. Do you go USC T-shirt under the Arizona State polo, or do you just go full USC polo?
See, this is another thing, is I'm actually going to be working with the USC radio crew this week, and I'm going to be spotting for them. And last year I worked for them down in Tucson when they played U of A, and I wore a USC polo, but ASU was playing that day, so I wore an ASU shirt underneath. This year I've been told to wear a polo. Pete Arbogast told me since the Dodgers are in the World Series, I should wear a Dodgers polo. Now, I don't have one, so I think I'm just going to go with a shirt and tie, and I'll go with a red and gold tie to be a little bit neutral, if that helps.
Oh, that's perfect. Josh, always a pleasure getting to speak with you. I hope to get to see you again in the summers doing play-by-play in the Cal Summer Ball League. That's Josh Schaefer. Up next, we're going to be talking some baseball. The World Series starts tomorrow between the Houston Astros and the Los Angeles Dodgers. It's going to be a fun one. Battle of two high-powered offenses. We have that and more when we return to In the Trenches. In the Trenches. I am Garrett Schwartz. With me is Jeff Dubrov on Monday evening, as always. And yes, tomorrow is the start
to the World Series. Our hometown team, the LA Dodgers, will be hosting the Houston Astros. Pitching, we got two aces, two former Cy Young winners, potentially two Cy Young winners this season. Clayton Kershaw and Dallas Keuchel. But man, oh man, the Dodgers in the World Series for the first time in 29 years, 1988, and Houston in the first time in more than a decade since 2005. I must mention that Saturday night, in addition to USC breaking my heart, the New York Yankees also breaking my heart, blowing a 3-2 lead against the Houston Astros. So again, we got the Dodgers and the Astros. Jeff's World Series pick at the start of the playoffs was the Astros. Mine was the Yankees. I got to say, I was pretty close, but came up a little short. Jeff, who do you like and why?
I'm sticking with it, Garrett. I'm going with the Houston Astros. I really am. And there's something about this team right now. And I understand, look, I think everyone was overreacting when they went down 3-2 against the Yankees, because look what happened. What happened was what is supposed to happen in the playoffs. The home team won. Big whoop. You lost your games on the road and you get two back to win the series. And that's exactly what they did. They showed, and not only that, they showed championship caliber performances. That you had Verlander come out in Game 6. He was phenomenal. Charlie Morton came out in Game 7. A guy he's good. He's good. He's not Verlander or Keuchel, and he had a great game. It showed to me that the team has a lot of heart. I mean, this is a team whose best players are 5'6". They're the definition of heart. And I think no one's picking them. Everyone's picking the Dodgers. Everyone's picking the hot team, which is very understandable. But
Jeff,
rightfully
I think
so.
you just beat yourself up on your own point, which is that the home team wins, and unfortunately for Houston, they don't have home field advantage.
I think Houston splits the two games, because I think Verlander's going to come out in Game 2, and I think he's going to have a great performance. I think Houston wins this series in 6. I'm going to go as far as to say they're going to win Game 6 in Los Angeles.
So I watched a lot of Houston baseball, obviously, with the Yankees playing them, and I can tell you right now, the biggest concern for Houston is two things. Number one, far and away, is the bullpen. Clearly, the biggest weakness across the board for both teams. If you don't remember, Houston blowing a 4-0 lead to the Yankees in Game 3, allowing them to, eventually lead off that 3-game win streak and jumping out to 3-2. The second biggest is their fourth starter. You mentioned Charlie Morton, who came up huge against the Yankees in Game 7, but that was at home, and that's not going to happen on the road. Game 4 will be. Actually, sorry, it will be at home. I'm completely wrong. So maybe the Dodgers have a chance in that regard, but you were spot on. The biggest game is going to be Game 2. If big game guy Justin Verlander can come through and beat you, Darvish, they're really going to have a chance. But if LA jumps out to a 2-0 lead, it's over. And I don't see Kershaw losing. As good as Keuchel's been, he's a different pitcher on the road. He is. You saw that against the Yankees. And again, it's all in the hands of Justin Verlander. I'm going to make my pick, though. I'm going to say the Dodgers are going to win in 6. I think they're going to win 2 at home. I just think the Dodgers are way too good of a team, especially offensively. And the thing is, if they can get Verlander out in 6 or even 7 innings, they're just going to tear apart whatever Houston pitcher comes in that 8th and 9th inning. I think Houston's going to win at least 2 out of 3 at home, which is why I said 6. But man, oh man, Houston is just not the same team on the road.
Here's the thing that I think gives me hope about Houston. I think Houston, although Los Angeles, the Dodgers, we know, went on that unbelievable streak. I think it was 50 out of 55 games they won, something like that. They also went on a stretch where they lost 16 out of 17. So this is a team that they're not going to find themselves in a slump now, but that slump came out of nowhere. For all we know, what if they get in that slump again? I think Houston's been the more consistent team all season. Granted, you could say LA won all those games in a row, but they also came out and they dropped 16 out of 17. I think the consistency of Houston all season long is something that they're going to have in their back pocket, and that was also without Verlander. This is a team, again, though, they struggled against the Yankees pitchers who, granted, the Yankees pitchers, I think, went under the radar that was some of the best pitching performances from CC Bathia and what's his name? Tanaka, of course. And then they pitched very, very well, and I think not enough people are giving them credit. I think the AL is just a lot stronger overall than the NL. I really do. I don't think the Cubs were that great.
The thing is, though, with Houston, the Houston offense undeniably struggling against the Yankees pitching, right?
Yeah.
But if you're struggling against the Yankees pitching, you're sure as heck not going to find any more luck against the Dodgers, right? I mean, Clayton Kershaw and Yu Darvish. You talk about a 1-2 punch. I don't think it gets any better in all of baseball.
Dallas Keuchel and Justin Verlander.
It's if those guys are pitching at home, I think you have a solid argument, but I don't think that's the case.
Here's the thing. You know how much happy I am that it is, no offense, this is no offense to your Yankees. You know how happy I am that it's Dodgers Astros over even Cubs Astros or Cubs Yankees or Dodgers Yankees. These are two franchises, one of which has never won a World Series ever, and the other hasn't won since 1988. And there's something about this World Series in particular. You have great characters on each side. You have a guy like Clayton Kershaw who's done everything right. He's won multiple Cy Youngs. He's won multiple MVPs. And he's just never won a ring. And then you have guys on the other side, Jose Altuve, I keep on mentioning 5, 6. By the way, you know what's interesting? Sports Illustrated back in 2014 picked the Astros to win the 2017 World Series. That was a cover article they had in mid-June, was the Astros, your 2017 World Series champions, and they're 4 wins away from getting that correct. There's so much intrigue. There's so much fan involvement. You have the city of Houston coming in after that awful hurricane. I mean, how amazing would it be for that city? And you have Los Angeles, who's just been in a professional sports championship drought in close to 10 years now.
All right, you pick Houston. I like LA. You got to pick one guy who's going to be the key player for Houston this series. Are you picking the probably AL MVP and Jose Altuve?
Absolutely. If Jose Altuve can continue his offensive ways, he's just a little firecracker. And he brings the team together. He's unbelievable. But that 1-2 punch of Jose Altuve followed by Carlos Correa, and then you have a guy like Brian McCann, if he can finally get going, I think Jose Altuve is absolutely the X factor for the Houston Astros. And Garrett, I'm going to ask the same for you and the Dodgers.
And I'm picking Yu Darvish. You know, you pointed out Justin Verlander, and I'm taking the number 2 starter for the Dodgers because if they win following what should be a win in Clayton Kershaw's Game 1 start, I think this series is over. I mean, Houston's going to have to win all 3 at home. That's extremely tough to do, even though the Yankees did it in the ALCS. But, man, you look at Darvish, a guy, you talked about inconsistency for the Dodgers, and he's really been a guy that's had a lot of ups and downs. I mean, at one point, losing 7 starts in a row, that's not good for Darvish. But, I mean, in his 3 postseason starts, or actually 4 if you include Colorado, in 3 of them he's given up 1 earned run or less, 2 shutout games. I mean, look, it's very simple. You win Game 2, you put Houston in a very difficult situation. And Justin Verlander is a guy who's just not losing games in the postseason. So if Darvish can find a way to make it deep in Game 2, 7, like I'm talking 7 innings, and reach that Houston bullpen, he's got a shot.
I agree. It's going to be very interesting. When we return, we're going to take a quick break. We'll transition from the diamond to the basketball court. NBA season upon us. Already some exciting things happen. Players getting ejected, mouthpieces being thrown, and Kevin Durant's all-time pettiness. That when we return. We are back on In the Trenches. I'm Garrett Schwartz. With me is Jeff Dubrov. It's Monday night. Also got some Monday Night Football going on. The Philadelphia Eagles put in a nice performance against the Washington Redskins. I was up by 30, and Carson Wentz put up 33 points. I lost again. I'm 2-5 now.
I actually won by 1 point tonight, behind Carson Wentz's 41 points. But anyway, it is time for one of my personal favorite segments, Bold Prediction Gary.
You are hot, hot, hot.
That is right. It is Bold Prediction Gary, where I'm going to come out, give 3 hot takes, smoking hot. That's right. I am never wrong. And Jeff is going to respond by answering bold or not bold. So, Jeff, this is Bold Prediction Gary, NBA edition. As you know, we're 1 week into the NBA season, but very premature, yet I still have some extremely bold takes. Here we go. Bold take number 1. The 76ers, after a 1-3 start, not a playoff team in the very, very, very weak Eastern Conference, and I'll tell you why. Ben Simmons, by the way, has looked phenomenal. I was flat out wrong about that guy. I mean, he is, a 6'10", 6'11" point guard who is seemingly unstoppable. He can score, he can pass, he can defend. But here is why I don't think Philly will be a playoff team, and that is Joel Embiid. The guy who was given the $120 million+ contract just a few weeks ago. He's a guy who's already playing too many minutes this season. In their season opener against the Washington Wizards, they lost by 5, and that was only because Embiid was able to play 30+ minutes in that game. And if he's doing that throughout the season, which is going to be the only way they're going to be able to stay competitive, they're not going to have a shot. And Embiid is going to get hurt, and that contract is going to look really, really bad. So, Jeff, 76ers not a playoff team.
I told you this last week. That's not bold. Because I completely agree with you, and I think a lot of people agree with you, except for Vegas. I made a bet with a friend. I don't think they're going to win 40 games, and I didn't even take into account the fact that they're already pushing Joel Embiid's minutes. They're just, Markelle Fultz hasn't done really much to impress me. He still has that wacky free throw shooting. JJ Redick is not a starting shooting guard. He's getting paid like one. He's getting paid like he's getting deservedly paid the money that he makes, that 1 year, $20 million deal. But he's not a starting shooting guard, and that's what made him so effective, was him coming off the bench. He's not a good starter. Ben Simmons has been phenomenal, and I just don't think Robert Covington's that great. I'm going to go not bold because I just don't think that team's that good. I still think they're the same old 76ers with just some new faces.
Yeah, Philadelphia looking really bad in a few games already.
Terrible.
Getting double-digit losses to both the Toronto Raptors and the Gordon Hayward-less Boston Celtics. So Jeffrey Dubrov, like myself, not trusting the process. All right, hot take number 2. LeBron James, after witnessing an already disappointing LA Lakers team and Alonzo Ball, who looks like he's still far away from being an NBA superstar, will not be leaving Cleveland after this season because of how much help this LA Lakers team is going to need. I mean, if I'm LeBron James, I'm thinking, all right, I am most certainly in the back nine of my career. Still pretty darn close to his prime, but he's definitely in the second phase of his career. And if I'm going to LA, I'm thinking, all right, I need to have a really good shot at least once to take down that Golden State super team. But I'm looking around and I say, okay, Brandon Ingram, he's still about 30 pounds away from being relevant. Lonzo Ball, he's not even shooting 30% on the season. In fact, way worse. Why on earth would I lead of a Cleveland team that's far and away the best in the East for a Laker team that's far and away from being a playoff team?
Well, here's the thing, and I'm unsure of this because I think it depends on a lot. So I'm not going to say whether or not it's bold or not. I think it's right in the middle because I do think there's a way that he does leave, and I think it's given a lot on what the guys around him in Cleveland does. If he finds to have himself having a good time and Dwayne Wade opts into another year in Cleveland, they stay together, I don't see why he would. This is a Lakers team that is far worse. He'd be joining a far worse team because I don't think Paul George is going to leave Oklahoma City. I don't think he is. I think he's going to stay there for a couple more years, given the fact that Russ signed that monster contract. This is a Laker team that is not going to. The only free agent they can really bring in is LeBron. They're not going to be nearly as good, and not to mention, LeVar Ball is still running his mouth. At what point is he going to stop? And if I'm LeBron, why go there and deal with that and deal with LeVar Ball breathing over my shoulder to get his son the ball more? I think
it's been very clear throughout LeBron James's career that he needs to be the alpha. He 100%. Needs to be the guy making the decisions. And not to say by any means that LeVar's going to be doing that, but he's still a guy that might steal the spotlight from LeBron, and that might bother him just a little bit.
Absolutely.
Especially when you're going to Hollywood.
Well, I also think LeBron is a professional. There's no getting around that, but LeVar Ball is not. And at a certain point, I think LeBron has to realize he's in a much better situation now. And I understand he doesn't like the ownership, he doesn't like the front office, but he's with his best friend. They have a good team. And once Isaiah Thomas... By the way, Derrick Rose has been playing phenomenal, but once they get IT back from his injury, I think they're going to be great. I think it's a Cleveland team that I think is far better than they were last year.
Yeah, and I most certainly do not disagree. By the way, Cleveland already moving Dwayne Wade out of the starting lineup.
And he asked for that, so...
No, just kind of interesting.
I think that's the smart move.
bold prediction, hot take number 3. After a 1-2 start, actually 2-2, I believe they won tonight. So a 2-2 start.
They did.
The Golden State Warriors might not be a playoff team. And look, let's be honest.
Wait.
Sorry. Might not be a title team.
There you go.
And I'll tell you why. It has nothing to do with their 2-2 start, which, by the way, pretty comical. Stephen Curry and Kevin Durant getting ejected from one of their games, and together,
I'm about to rant about that.
You'll rant about that. But it just goes down to the strength of the Western Conference. Look, I watched a Miami Heat dynasty team in year 4. You get tired, right? You get fatigued. People get hurt. And they didn't have any competition in the Eastern Conference. The Golden State Warriors, on the other hand, in their going for their 4th title run, with the exception of Kevin Durant, they're going to be tired. They're going to be banged up. And they got more competition than ever in the Houston Rockets, in the San Antonio Spurs, even though I don't like them, in the Oklahoma City Thunder. So I think there's a really solid chance that this might not be Golden State's year.
I agree, and let's also mention they've also had some luck along the way in the past couple of years. Last year, in their playoff run, outside of the Cavs, in the Western Conference, every team they played was without one of their star players. And you look at the Western Conference Finals, they were out, the Spurs were without Kawhi Leonard, which, by the way, if you haven't looked, the Spurs are 3-0, and they're without Kawhi, and LaMarcus Aldridge looks fantastic. Golden State, I don't think, is a title team this year because they haven't gotten the bad luck going their way. And I'm not saying that bad luck, you can't have luck be everything about it, but I mean, they've had good luck in terms of the teams they play getting injured. And here's the point I want to get at now, unless you have anything to add.
No, keep going. I mean, I think luck is a big factor,
Oh,
and I mentioned in your 4th year going for a championship, fatigue is definitely a key factor. And if you lose a Durant or a Curry, who are guys that have been injury prone throughout their careers, this is not a team that's a shoo-in for an NBA championship. I mean, I'm not so sure I'm sold on the Spurs, but I'm not going to fight you on that one. But man, 2 not bolds and a not too bold from Jeff Dubrov.
Yeah, but here's the thing I want to go with in Golden State. And I saw this today from Nick Wright, and I don't usually like to agree with Nick Wright because I think Nick Wright, he's very smart and he's very talented. There are things I just don't agree with, but this is one of the things I completely agree with, and everyone on the show actually agreed with him. Chris Carter and the host themselves on their First Things First show. When is enough for the Golden State Warriors? One of the fans, and I understand, I think they're the most disliked team in all of sports. You have Steph Curry throwing mouthpieces at referees after not getting a call, which, by the way, was not a foul. He completed the play. He was just, I lost against the Grizzlies on the road. And he throws his mouthpiece. First off, any other player in the league does that, I think they're suspended for a game. Udonis Haslem, Nick Wright said this today, Udonis Haslem threw his mouthpiece on the ground. It went up and happened to bump a referee, and he was suspended for an NBA playoff game. And all Steph Curry, who threw this directly at him, I don't care what you think, threw it directly at him, is only getting a fine. And then you have Kevin Durant walking off the court showing his ring finger to the people of Memphis, and you say, but LeBron shows how many rings he has. Greg Popovich, Kobe Bryant. Those are out of joy and harmlessness and sarcasm. This is out of pure pettiness, insecurity, the whole insecure Kevin Durant thing. He runs, he's like, I gotta get ejected too. I gotta get ejected too.
I'm going to disagree. And here's why. Don't forget, this was a team 2 seasons ago that had a Draymond Green suspended in the NBA Finals. So, I mean, to say the team hasn't been held accountable is a little bit of a stretch. But come on, you got guys showing emotion.
I'm not saying the team. I'm saying Steph Curry. Steph Curry does things that are just utter disrespectful, just flat out disrespectful to the teams that he is playing, the fans that he's playing against, falling asleep on the bench during an NBA Finals game. You don't see you would never see a Kobe Bryant, LeBron James, or Tim Duncan do that. Ever.
The NBA is a star-driven league, just like I don't want to see NFL players suspended for touchdowns. Let's get the players playing.
But you want the face of the league throwing mouthpieces at referees? Give me a break.
All right, we got just a few minutes left. Jeff and I did not do our picks for this Saturday against the Arizona State Devils on the road in Tempe. USC coming off a loss in South Bend. It was an ugly one, and things aren't going to change. We're still hurt without Stephen Carr, without Peter Gussin, without Josh Fatu. Jeff, Who do you like in this one?
I like the Trojans. I do. And I agree with what Josh said. I do think they come out fired up. And I think this is an Arizona State team that's good, but they struggle defending the pass. They're both bottom half in the Pac-12 in rush defense and pass defense. And I think this is finally the game that the team, hopefully this is finally the game where they just let Sam Darnold throw 50, 60 passes, because I think that's the way we're going to beat them. I think the defense shows up. I think Manny Wilkins is going to get pressured. I think we're going to throw some blitz schemes that he necessarily hasn't seen before. But I think it's going to be a close one. I think we pull it out. I think we win by 14. I'm going to go 31-17 Trojans.
I think this is a game that's too soon to call. And again, it just comes down to injuries. You got a hobbled Sam Darnold, still a depleted offensive line. I don't think Stephen Carr will be back. The defense had a ton of losses to their front seven, a few guys getting hurt in that last game. If we're healthy, I think talent reigns supreme, especially this is a team that's responded well in the past to adversity. This Trojans team has won pretty much every time following a loss, the exception being the Alabama game last season. If we're healthy, I think we win. I'm going to say by 10 points, 31-21. If not, no way.
When was the last? You've called 31-21 in a lot of your recent games. I think that's what you've called.
But you always go high score.
I did 31-17 this time, but
I mean, I don't know what you see. I don't know what. Yeah, so you match me in the offense, but normally, I mean, I don't know what you've seen in the past in this offense to make you believe we can score more than 31 points.
Hey, look, if Butch Jones at Tennessee still has a job, I believe anything is real, because the fact that man still has a job is, well, Garrett, I'll let you close it up.
That is all we got on this Monday evening for In the Trenches. I am Garrett Schwartz. With me is Jeff Dubrov. Oh, man, I hope this Saturday goes better than the last one. Thank you for joining us. You are listening to KXSC online at kxsc.org or on the airwaves at 1560 a.m. We'll be back next Monday at 8 p.m. Pacific time. Have a good week.